Hey everybody, Dee here with another D is for Digital Masterclass. So good that you can join because we have the most amazing, keep forgetting which way I have to point, young lady with us, Sarah Williams, all the way from New Zealand today. She's our first Kiwi to have on the masterclass, and I wanted Sarah here because I've known Sarah for a couple of years now, and she's one, an amazing person, but two, an expert in her field. Now, Sarah is the CEO and founder of Leading Culture Limited, which is a global culture and leadership development consultancy. She does fabulous work. She's a certified in conversational intelligence, which is a method of harnessing the neuroscience behind conversations. She's over 20 years consulting experience in a whole lot of different industries. And when I was talking to her about coming on, she just picked the best title ever, which is Cortisol and the Coronavirus: Why People Hoard Toilet Paper and Other Crazy Things, which I just think is possibly the best masterclass title we've had so far. So Sarah, welcome. Thanks a million for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, Dee. It's my pleasure.
So tell us, before we get into the cortisol and the corona craziness, which everybody is talking about, obviously, let us so you're coming from New Zealand. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so kia ora everybody. I'm Sarah from New Zealand, and I've got to do a bit of a shout out to all my Pacific Island whānau as well. So Tulupalava, Bulavanaka, Malo Elele, Kia orana, and I'm sorry if I've forgotten some of the other ones. So it's fabulous to be on the call. Yeah, I come from little old Aotearoa, so that's the land of the long white cloud, and I have been living here all of my life. Bit of a global traveller, although of course not at the moment. But yeah, I've been living here all of my life. I am a mother to, I can't even say two teenagers anymore because one of them turned 21, which means I can't say that they're a teenager. So two daughters, 18 and 21. And yeah, love business, love all things business, and especially things like culture and culture transformation and change, and just how human beings interact in this thing that we call business and life. Yeah.
Love it. And tell me, how has COVID-19 impacted New Zealand right now and your business as well?
Yeah, so New Zealand's we're at, I think it's day 12 today of total lockdown. So we are all being told to stay at home unless for essential services. That's the only reason we can leave. And it's going pretty well. Today was also the first day that we had more cases recovered than we had contracting the virus. Right. So that's what they've said to us is kind of the marking stone of saying that we're starting to turn things around. So that's really positive news, and we're all pretty excited. It does mean, though, that the government's got a little bit of a challenge in making sure that people stay at home because for those of you who know New Zealand, we have like amazing, beautiful, wide open spaces and lots of gorgeous beaches and stuff. And our police and our military are having to try and keep people in their houses and not go into all of these great places. So yeah, it's been kind of funny because now, as well as getting stats on coronavirus and who's contracting it, who's recovering, we're also getting stats on how many times the police have had to tell someone off to tell them to go home.
Wow.
So yeah, it's funny, but there's a huge social responsibility, and people, the police set up a helpline actually, so then people could effectively dog people in, and that's exactly what's happening. So people are being really responsible. I think a large part of the cases of people that are, being caught out and about a little bit or a little bit too far from home is just because they really didn't know. They thought it was okay. Yeah. So they thought it was okay to ride their bike, and go on the normal 10-kilometer ride that they do or whatever, and they're now being told, no, you can't do that.
And what about from a business perspective? Because I've seen you doing some fantastic things on Facebook. So how has COVID impacted you?
So we're predominantly face-to-face. We're a consultancy. So we're usually in organisations predominantly. And probably from about it would have been as early as the beginning of February, we started to notice that a lot of our clients were saying, hey, we're going to put a hold on some of the workshops that we were planning to run, all of those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So it's really affected our business from a face-to-face point of view. And so we did a pivot in about mid-February, where we started to produce a lot of our programs virtually and start to put them online. We also made a couple of big sort of calls in terms of our what we would call kaupapa here. So it's kind of like our reason for being. Our reason for being became supporting our client base and our customer base far more so than about us, you know, like trying to sell something to somebody.
Yes.
So as part of that, we developed a Facebook group, which is a closed Facebook group, you know, where people can ask to be invited to join. And we show up every single day in that group. We show up at about morning tea time, so then you can sit there with a cup of tea or a coffee, New Zealand time, and we'll talk about things that are current and that we're hearing in the leadership space, and just supporting leaders all around the world, actually, in terms of how they can show up and some of the challenges that they're facing at the moment, because, you know, it's scary times for everybody. So, yeah.
And what's the name of that group?
That is Leading Culture Leadership Support Group.
Wow. Can anybody join that, or is it just for your
Yes.
customers? Okay.
No, anybody can join it.
So, and that's in Facebook, Leading Culture Customer Support Group.
Leadership Support Group. Yeah.
Leadership Support Group. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
It's for anybody who wants to jump in. So your interest in neuroscience, which I think we have in common, we both are curious about people and how they work and why we're crazy and complicated and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about this whole toilet roll phenomenon. And like I've even talking to some friends in the Caribbean last week, they were saying their supermarkets had gone crazy and they'd seen people fighting over, you know, food products. So explain the madness to us. What's happening to us right now?
So I think most people on the call at some stage in their life have heard of this thing called fight or flight, or you know, like that fight or flight kind of response. Yeah. So people have heard of that, right? And that's pretty much what kicks in every single human being. The minute that our body and our brain kind of scans our environment and says, oh, something doesn't seem safe here. And so we experience this thing called fight or flight. Now, the thing that's happened through neuroscience and the study of what's going on in the brain is it's been really cool. And excuse me a moment as I geek out on it, because I like to geek out on it. But what's happened is that we now have access to what they call functional MRI. And so we can actually scan people's brains and see their brain reactions to all sorts of situations. And so what they've discovered is actually what occurs in that moment of that fight or flight response. And so what happens is our body or our brain sends a signal to the rest of our body and says, can you please pump out a whole lot of cortisol into the body? Now, cortisol, for many of you, you may have heard of that before, it's a hormone that is in our system, and it's our stress response kind of hormone. But it's really important in those situations when we are actually under threat, because what it does is it says to our body, okay, we're under threat now. We need to pump all the resources and the blood and the oxygen and everything to our major muscle groups. So then we can either fight whatever's coming our way or flee, you know, with our legs. So that's what it says to our body. It says, right, shut everything else down, and we're just going to make sure that we can either run from this thing or we can stand up and fight this thing. Now, in our modern day society, I don't know, I haven't seen too many saber-toothed tigers or anything like that going to jump out of the bushes at us. So it's not overly helpful for us. But unfortunately, this is driven by this part of our brain called our prehistoric brain. And so it hasn't forgotten that that's how it responded to stress situations. So it still continues to do that. And so what happens is it actually, because the brain's an incredibly efficient machine, it now reduces the resources to all the other parts of the brain. And, you know, many of you would say, okay, who cares? What does it matter? We've got all our muscles going and we're all good to go. Well, the problem starts to show up in that every other area of our brain, our limbic brain, our prefrontal cortex, lots of other parts of our brain are now on limited resources and therefore not functioning properly. Now, what's important about that is those are the areas of our brain that give us emotional responses, so regulate our emotional response, and also give us that higher executive function like decision making and new ideas and stuff. So let's paint the picture for you. Imagine we're now going into the supermarket. We've just heard that, you know, coronavirus is coming out or something like that, and we're now in a fight or flight response. Our body's gone, oh goodness, this is not safe. And now cortisol is flooding through our system, reducing the parts of our brain that we can actually use, right? So now we walk into the supermarket and we have limited emotional response capacity. We have limited decision-making capacity. Both of those things are really important. And so what do? We look around to see what everybody else is doing, see that they're grabbing toilet paper, think, oh, well, they're doing it, I may as well do it as well. And then we end up grabbing toilet paper like everybody else. You know, there's a couple of reasons why we do that, because many people go straight to a point of survival. Now, I'm not sure why that's toilet paper. I would personally grab things like flour, potatoes, rice, practical stuff. But we don't actually know how we're going to respond all the time when our brain is in this fight or flight response. And so that's what happens. We look around for some ideas and some cues because we actually can't make decisions for ourselves in those moments of extreme adrenal fatigue and, you know, that real extreme fight or flight response. So that's what's going on in our brains at the time, and that's why we're picking up toilet paper and not flour and rice.
It sounds like cortisol just makes us stupid. It removes sort of intelligent brain function, right? But I think listening to you then, because you can see there seems to be ranges of people, some people, like we've seen on the television, who are properly willing to fight someone to get the toilet roll or the hand sanitizer, whatever. And then you have other people who are sort of just standing back and looking at the madness that is going on. So is there dependencies on how cortisol affects us, or how would one person react one way and one another?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things going on here. We have what I call a woe to go meter. Each of our woe to go meter is a little bit different. And so some people might only get from 0 to 20, whereas others will get from 0 to 100 in, under a second. So there's that going on as well. The other thing that is going on is that a lot of people have already built up internal capability to actually start to reduce that cortisol effect in their own bodies. So some of you might notice that, because everybody knows when I talk about a cortisol response, they can remember, they can recall what a cortisol response feels like. You know, those times when your boss has asked you a question and then suddenly you're like, oh, I knew the answer a second ago and now it's gone. Where's it gone to? That's a cortisol response, right? Or that time when you have that real, that knot in the pit of your stomach and you're just, really freaking out and you feel like you almost can't take that next step. Again, a cortisol response. But many of us have started over time to develop just innately. We develop ways of mitigating this cortisol response that happens to us. And it's things like, have you ever seen somebody when they're just in like that real stressed out state and they go, they just take this massive sigh? That's actually a way of resetting our whole brain function. So even though we don't even know that we've done it, we've actually started to reset our brain function.
My dad tells me I do that a lot. I sigh a lot, apparently, so maybe that's why I'm calm.
Yeah, exactly. And, many of us have got lots of different techniques that if you actually stopped and thought about it, you've got ways that create you shifting from that state of a cortisol response or that fight or flight. You've actually got ways that you've learned over time that will move you into a different state.
Yes. Wow.
And the state that we're looking to move into is another two hormones that we're looking to produce in our system, which is oxytocin and dopamine. Now, some of you may have heard of those before. Some people refer to oxytocin as like the cuddle hormone. And dopamine's often known as like a happiness hormone kind of thing. So that's what we're looking to increase in our system in those moments where we actually feel that fight or flight response happen in our system. Yeah.
So for someone who's listening in and they're going, okay, I'm the cortisol person that she's talking about, how can you, I suppose, easily or naturally raise your oxytocin and dopamine levels?
So the very first one is breathing. So deep breathing. I really favor a controlled breathing cycle. So depending on how long your natural breath is, it may not go for a full 10, but I like to breathe in for 10, hold for 10, breathe out for 10. That's a great way. And even if you do breathe in for 3, hold for 3, breathe out for 3, do that repeatedly, and it will start to reset your hormones and your brain functions again.
Yeah.
So that's a really great way. There's also one of the things that Dee said at the beginning of the interview, that I'm actually certified in conversational intelligence. And one of the pieces of information that was so amazing to me and why I went down that pathway of conversational intelligence is the fact that our words actually affect people in this way as well. So the words that we choose to use can give somebody a cortisol response. So, if you're interacting with a colleague, a team member, anything like that, you can actually inadvertently cause somebody to have a cortisol response. And so the choice of our words in those moments can help somebody also flick into oxytocin as well. So if we think about the types of things that make people feel safe and happy, it's things like, for example, if you're withholding information and I get a sense that you might be withholding information from me, then I'll probably end up with a cortisol response.
Yeah.
So the opposite of that is thinking about transparency. How can we be a lot more transparent in our communication? One of the other things, so this is actually the TRUST acronym, and that's how we actually help our oxytocin levels, is to build high levels of trust. So one of the other things that we can do is we can make sure that we've got great relationships. So what are the words that we can choose that help enhance our relationship as we're having a conversation? That's very helpful. Understanding, so making sure that we actually have an understanding from each other's perspective as well. So it's okay for me to sit here and say, I've got an understanding, I've totally worked out you, Dee, it's fine. But unless I actually understand from your perspective, we're not actually producing oxytocin in that conversation at all.
Yeah.
Because you'll get a sense that my understanding is different from your actual reality, and you'll switch off and you'll start to actually raise your cortisol because you're, oh, hang on, she doesn't understand me. She's not, it's not safe.
Yeah.
Is what the brain starts to say. So your brain kind of only says it's safe or it's not safe. That's really how it works.
Yeah.
Understanding, and then shared success. So if we can find ways in our conversations to actually share in success and have that unity in successes, that helps to raise oxytocin as well. And then the final one is truth telling. So making sure that actually we are honest about the situation. So if you're standing at the supermarket and you're fighting with somebody over toilet rolls, and you're telling them that you are down to your last toilet roll, when you know that that is not the truth and you've got a stockpile at home, you're actually going to raise your own cortisol and you're going to raise theirs, and that's going to be a disaster.
Yeah. Wow. Because what it's making me think of, I was watching the news yesterday, and I'm trying not to watch as much news as possible, but obviously staying at home now for some people is causing more stress, because there may be people who are in domestic violence situations where it's not safe at home. So you're already full of cortisol because of corona. Now you're in a situation where you're at home and that's not safe either. Like that must be extremely hard for people to process and manage.
It is it is very, very tricky, and the research at the moment suggests that cortisol will remain in your system for 26 hours. So that's a long time to still remain in your system. It will deplete over that time, but you will still have cortisol in your system. So when you start to think about those higher executive functions of your brain, every time you have a cortisol hit, you're depleting those higher executive functions. And so it's almost like a snowball type effect that, you get this cortisol, then you've got depleted executive function, therefore I can't make decisions properly, I can't come up with great ideas like I used to, like all of those sorts of things. So you really want to be looking at ways that you can start to bring that feeling of warmth, that cuddle hormone kind of feeling into your life. And many of us have our own strategies about that. The breathing strategy is one. Some people like to do visualization and meditation. Not quite so appropriate at the moment, but some people will use like going to a place in nature, for example, as that. And it's that feeling of just, the same feeling you get with a sigh. If you can replicate that in any way, you'll be helping to increase oxytocin.
Love it. So we have a lot of businesses listening. So from a recap perspective, so if you're a business and you have loads of, we can presume all our employees are stressed out right now, even if they're coming across as calm, there's cortisol going on, and businesses, I suppose, we have to be on their A game right now as well. I mean, there's very little opportunity to take a step back from business, and with all of the craziness going on, we still need people working at the best possible levels that they can. So what I'm hearing from you, businesses, you should be helping your staff breathe.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe get somebody in who knows this stuff and record a video and share it of how to do breathing exercises. Be careful of the words that you're using when you're speaking to your teams. Be straightforward with them, build trust, be transparent, be understanding, all of those great things. And they communicate a lot as well. Like, I think we need to over communicate at the moment, so that people feel they know everything that they need to know, and rather than worrying more, right?
Yeah, be as inclusive as you can possibly be, as transparent as you can possibly be, even if it looks like you saying, look, I don't have all the answers right now, but together we'll discover them. That is a beautiful oxytocin phrase, because I've been transparent in that phrase. I've said that, actually there's a relationship. We're going to do this thing. I might even acknowledge that I know that you're feeling frightened at the moment. So am I, but together we'll work through this. Beautiful oxytocin then. Yeah.
Love it. So how has the cortisol impacted you?
It's interesting because, I've been working in this space now for quite a while. So one would think that I would be able to harness my own cortisol and I'd be good as gold. But that is not the reality. My brain is still my brain. It still reacts in the same ways and stuff. I'd like to think that I'm a little bit better at recovering from cortisol, but it still hits me many times. And I can have situations, so these Facebook Lives that we do every single day, I've had a couple of times where I've had total cortisol hits and just been left like, like flapping my gums kind of thing. And, many of you will relate to that. So absolutely. Just things like sometimes if I read, I'm a lot like you, I don't watch the news, so I'll read sort of the stats for the day, and sometimes I feel that gives me a cortisol hit. So I've just got to put stuff down and I've got to walk away and I've got to do some stuff that helps me produce oxytocin, so then I can clear out that cortisol as best as I can.
It's great to be aware of it, because as much as I don't watch much television, obviously I'm glued to my phone and I get the little buzzer when there's news. And obviously Boris Johnson went into intensive care yesterday, and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And I was like, I immediately got heightened. And I was like, oh, like that's awful. And I'm not a conservative, but he's a human being, and you wouldn't want anybody, to suffer from this. And I was glued to the television for, I'd say, half an hour before I had to sort of go, okay, that's enough. Like, I don't need to know anymore. There's nothing I can do. But I would imagine that was probably some sort of cortisol as well, because if it can happen to someone like Boris Johnson, it can certainly happen to anyone, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the fact that you didn't step away from the TV or whatever it was that you were looking at for half an hour, that's the cortisol response there, right? Yeah. Because now the executive function is not saying to you, actually, this isn't helping you at all, you should step away from the TV. Yeah. It takes that cortisol to start depleting before suddenly your brain says, hey, you know what, this isn't helping me. I've got to move away. So, that's the really interesting piece, is you watch as the cortisol starts to deplete and slowly this sort of brain function comes back. You know, if you've ever experienced time where you've had a cortisol, you've you know that something's done something to you and you're now in that fight or flight response, and you've just gone into this total like rage or something like that, absolutely appalling kind of emotional behavior, and you just, even though you know that it's not the right way to respond to something, even if you're by yourself and you're throwing things around and just having a hissy fit, you know it's not the right way to respond, but still there's nothing in you that can stop you from doing it. And it takes this, this depletion of cortisol to start winding down, and you're going, oh, okay, now I can, try and gather myself together and gather my faculties again.
I love it. So now, rather than going to the supermarket and being judgmental and giving dirty looks at the people that are behaving badly, we can all maybe be better and sort of maybe go and have a chat with them, a socially distant chat. Go, are you okay? It's all right. Yeah,
absolutely. Even a phrase like, hey, I know that it's tough, we're all just doing the best we can, will actually help to produce oxytocin for somebody. And so you'll be doing them a wee favour in that moment.
I like that. Yeah. What a perfect way to end our interview on a nice tone on how we can be better people, even during a crisis. I love it. Now, Sarah, if anyone wants to get in touch with you about what you do and the culture and leadership and training and everything, and cortisol, how do they get in touch with you?
So the best way to get in touch with us is through our website, so www.getleadingculture.com.
Okay, perfect.
So if you can't spell that because of my Kiwi accent, it's get as in G-E-T, leading culture. Yeah. So that's the best way to catch us. And please feel free, Dee, to share the link to our Facebook group. Yeah. We'd love to have people come and join us, post up their questions, and we respond. We're there every single weekday at 10:30 New Zealand time, and we're just responding to the questions and the concerns and the cortisol of the group, and doing our best to help promote some oxytocin for everyone.
Love it. Well, look, thanks a million for being here. This is really informative. Don't know about the listeners. I'm sure you have. I've learned a lot, so that's really helpful. And to the rest of you, thanks for tuning in again. Now you can be aware of your cortisol levels, and maybe you're living with, you're locked down with a family member right now who might be full of cortisol, and you're not being kind to them. Now you have all the tools you need to be a better person, take the high road, so we can all get through coronavirus with our relationships intact and not as stressed out as we need to be. So I hope you found that enjoyable. I'll be back tomorrow again with another masterclass. Have a great day. Talk to you soon. Bye.